The Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress would like to thank our trustee, Mr. Robert Day, for his generous support.
A simple journey around our nation's capital reveals a set of intentional design cues meant to say something very profound about America. For a relatively young nation, the architecture, the flourishes and finishing touches, seem to convey a sense of power and permanence, a subtle reminder that from the sheer strength of our ideals, the United States has earned its place amongst the most powerful nations in the world. From the beginning, the streets were laid out and buildings designed with strategy and intent, and with a certain gracefulness that almost serves as a prescription for the type of leadership that our nation would require to play this larger-than-life role in the course of human events. While some of these design elements are subtle, many of them are more overt. They herald the type of character and principles we seek in both our citizens and our leaders. Emblazoned in bronze and carved into stone are the qualities that have come to define the very ideal of what it means to be an American. Integrity, courage, service, and sacrifice, the very heartbeat of our country.
When I walk through Washington, I see hope, I see history, I see potential, I also see sacrifice. And at a time when our country seems divided, at a time when we seem to be faced with challenges that some may think are insurmountable, it reminds me that we've faced much greater challenges in our history.
I wish we would all take, a few more walks around late at night, the Lincoln Memorial or the Jefferson Memorial, or look at some of the words that are etched in so many of the buildings. They didn't always say this individual had the 100% correct solution. What they did say were, this was a leader that was willing to step up, take on a problem, and if we didn't get it 100% right, we as Americans could come back and fix it, but at least we were willing to step up and address our problems.
It was leadership based on these principles that defined the life of one of our great American heroes, Dwight David Eisenhower. It was this character that made him both the grand architect of our military success in the Second World War and the grand strategist of our political, military, and economic presence at the dawn of the Cold War. Eisenhower led our nation through some of the gravest trials we have ever faced, and he did so with grace and civility, and helped foster an America that became the envy of the world.
The world and we have passed the midway point of a century of continuing challenge. We sense with all our faculties that forces of good and evil are masked and armed and opposed as rarely before in history. We are called as a people to give testimony in the sight of the world to our faith that the future shall belong to the free.
One of the things that was so impressive about President Eisenhower is that he took strategy seriously. He ran a pioneering process that was called the Solarium process, where he actually had set up 3 competing teams to develop notions for American grand strategy. And then he had them debate in front of him, and he eventually sort of chose from across those groups and their ideas to really develop what became the governing strategy for several years of the Cold War.
The nation still longs for that leadership. How would Eisenhower have attacked the ISIS problem? What would have been his not only military strategy, but his diplomatic strategy? And how a command performance of a president of the United States can bring together that coalition of nations is necessary. I have just the most wonderful memories of the dignity with which he did everything.
Oftentimes, Dwight Eisenhower is underappreciated as a leader. You know, I think that many of us think of him as a great general and a great military leader, but I think that as president, he did so much in terms of being a long-term strategic thinker. And at one of the most difficult times of the Cold War, in the post-World War II period, he was able to balance near-term and long-term priorities. And so I think this strategic thinking, this creativity, the ability to reach above party lines, the ability to reach out to the private sector, these are all traits of Eisenhower that we try to push forward and fulfill every day here at the center. But it's also exactly what's needed in Washington in 2016.
It is this very concept of strategic, character-based leadership, profoundly demonstrated in the life of Dwight Eisenhower, that forms the core of the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, and the Eisenhower Award that we proudly present to our 2016 recipient, Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter.
Ash Carter brings people together because people respect him. They respect his intelligence, they respect his balance, they respect his patriotism. He is the right person at the right time to lead the United States of America's Defense Department.
Pentagon needs leaders of character, people who are going to put the country first, that are willing to upset Congress, upset people, to make sure that our troops get everything they need, not to have a fair fight, to have the technical and tactical advantage of our enemies, so we can win our nation's wars and keep our families safe. Ash Carter is one of those leaders of character. He gets it.
The key to leadership is really the ability to be bold, to be willing to take risks, to set goals, to achieve those goals, to be honest with yourself and honest with others. And those are, frankly, the qualities that Ash Carter has.
Somebody of Ash Carter's both intellectual depth, his coalition building skills, and his willingness to kind of get down into the weeds when necessary to get policies right, boy, oh boy, he is the right guy at the right time for our country.
There is perhaps no one who has led the Department of Defense with a more widely varied background than our 25th Secretary of Defense, Ashton Carter. His career has spanned the breadth of the scientific and global policy worlds. His natural curiosity and desire to do research ultimately led him to Yale University, where he earned degrees in both physics and medieval history. As he once said, there was no relationship between the two courses of study, except that they both fascinated him. After graduating from Yale, Ash Carter was selected as a Rhodes Scholar and went on to earn a doctorate in theoretical physics from Oxford University, in time becoming a physics professor at Oxford and serving as a postdoctoral fellow at Rockefeller University and MIT. While working as an experimental research associate at both Brookhaven and Fermilab National Laboratories, Ash Carter fell in love with science and its, quote, clean, modern, logical, and mathematical nature. His proudest paper was a highly theoretical study on time reversal invariance, the concept that the world could run backwards according to the same laws by which it runs forwards. In time, his devotion to contemplating such abstract ideas, mixed with the discipline of confronting complex theoretical challenges, would help form Ash Carter's approach to the public sector, giving him an uncommon ability to think at another level about the challenges facing our country and the world.
Ash is a very big brain. He is someone who can grapple with everything from physics to medieval history to nuclear policy, and I think that served him well.
I think Ash has a very good balance of the intellect, creativity, and personality necessary to succeed in his job and to succeed in this town, which is not an easy place to succeed these days. I think he has great empathy for others. I think he's very good about understanding somebody else's perspective, even if he doesn't agree with it. And I think that's one of the things that we've really lost in this town, is the ability to respect differences.
I think the great thing about Ash Carter is the fact that, he has such a diverse background with academia and in the private industry. And he brings that worldview here to the Pentagon and for our nation.
We're living in a dangerous world, and it's probably the most unstable world that we've had since the end of World War II. A lot of flashpoints in the world that we're having to confront. We're fighting a war on terrorism with ISIS. We're dealing with a Middle East that is in chaos with failed states like Syria and Yemen and Libya. We're dealing with continuing threats from Iran. We're dealing with threats from North Korea and instability in North Korea. We're dealing with a Russia that's in a whole new chapter of the Cold War. We're dealing with a China that is in the process of militarizing the South China Sea. And we're dealing with a whole new battlefield of the future, which is cyber attack. Having that kind of broad range of capabilities is unique to Ash Carter. He gets it, he understands it, and that's what makes him a very strong Secretary of Defense at a very critical time in our history.
In 1979, Ash Carter was persuaded to take a one-year hiatus from his work in theoretical physics to work with a scientific team at the Congressional Office of Technology Assessment. Over the next 3 decades, Ash Carter rotated between work in the Department of Defense and serving on the faculty of Harvard University. His many roles included serving as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy, where he was responsible for all strategic matters related to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, dealing with the collapse of the Soviet Union, securing its nuclear arsenal, and overseeing the U.S. nuclear arsenal and other strategic capabilities. He was able to use his keen intellect as chairman of NATO's high-level group, and he advanced agreements that set historic precedents in securing some of humanity's most dangerous weapons, including the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and the historic Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. During these years of moving between the academic and public sector arenas, Ash Carter came to demonstrate the same type of strategic thinking that always defined leaders like President Eisenhower and others. Citing the need for grand strategy, he remarked that in government, if you simply cope with what comes over the transom, you are not serving your trust properly. So it was no surprise when in 2009, then Professor Carter was once again called upon to serve his country. First as Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Then as Deputy Secretary of Defense from 2011 to 2013, and ultimately as Secretary of Defense in 2015. In his time at the Pentagon, Carter has been a hands-on leader, closely involved with procurement reform and innovative strategies to confront a changing world, most notably by forging a new level of cooperation with the private sector. Secretary Carter led the development and production of thousands of mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, MRAPs, and other rapid acquisitions that have saved thousands of service members' lives. Determined to get the most for both the warfighter and the taxpayer, Secretary Carter instituted what he called better buying power for the first time, guiding the department acquisition workforce to smarter and leaner purchasing. From 2011 to 2013, serving as DoD's Chief Operating Officer, Carter was responsible for overseeing the department's annual budget and its over 3 million civilian and military personnel. And just over a year into his tenure as Secretary of Defense, Carter has continued to exhibit effective leadership, approaching each challenge from a well-informed, strategic mindset, whether the anticipated threat relates to cybersecurity, space policies, climate change, or domestic concerns like political and budgetary uncertainty. Secretary Carter has continued to reform Pentagon procurement and budget processes, worked to remove gender-based restrictions on military service, and is successfully managing global crises by building broad coalitions to confront extremist groups and other threats around the world. He has applied the lessons of the private sector to help the Pentagon work better and fostered stronger ties between the defense and private sector technology communities.
There isn't anybody there, frankly, that's smarter than Ash Carter, and that's an advantage. It gives him the ability to understand complex issues, and it gives him the ability to understand how the department can best put that strategy into place so that we have the strongest defense force on the face of the earth.
I think one of the things that's impressed me about Ash's leadership in the Pentagon is that he hasn't lost sight of the stewardship piece. He hasn't lost sight of the fact that Ultimately, this is about taking good care of the people that we send into harm's way on behalf of the nation.
The great thing about Ash Carter is he listens, and he saw that every 24 convoys in Iraq resulted in a fatality of one of our soldiers. You know, as an Iraq War veteran and now the Acting Secretary of the Army, it was Ash Carter's work to make sure that we have the V-shaped poles on our vehicles, including our MRAP vehicles, which saved the lives of our troops over in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's because of his leadership and his ability to listen and get things done, which I will never forget.
We as a nation are very lucky to have Ash Carter play this critically important role of Secretary of Defense at this moment in time. Ash brings that both experience, academic experience, private sector experience, public sector experience, that is that rare combination that has always been needed, but with the variety of threats we face, with the enormous fiscal pressures we're under, with the constant threat of the return of sequestration, it takes someone of that kind of breadth and skill to get it right.
I'm also a member of the Defense Appropriations Committee, so we do the funding for the Defense Department. So we always have to look at the dollars. We always have to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for the buck. And because Secretary Carter has been involved so long in the Department of Defense, he knows that budget, he knows efficiencies, and he's attempting to implement that, and that's very positive for our country.
I've watched from a distance, of course, how he goes out now and talks to our troops. It's really a genuine roll up the sleeve, open the collar. Hey, I'm thinking of you night and day and your families.
His creativity, his innovation allows him to take the job of Secretary of Defense to a whole new level. And I think he's very Eisenhower-esque in his ability to build bridges with the private sector, with the scientific community, across party lines at a time where this is not happening in the way it should be.
Today, having served under 11 different Secretaries of Defense, appointed by both Republican and Democratic administrations, and having spent more than 3 decades combining his knowledge of science and technology with global strategy and policy, and based on his deep dedication to the men and women of the Department of Defense, Ash Carter is making our nation and the world a safer place. So it is on behalf of a grateful nation that the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress is proud to present the 2016 Eisenhower Award to an insightful researcher, a gifted manager, an able diplomat, and a steadfast leader, our nation's 25th Secretary of Defense, Ashton B. Carter.